This is Georgina Rose, and welcome to the Postmodern Iconoclast, a podcast that helps you destroy and break the false icons and idols of the digital age in search of a more authentic, esoteric spirituality. On this podcast, we discuss ideology, esoterica, and everything on the fringes of mysticism, religion, and related topics. Hello, this is Georgina Rose, and welcome to the show. In this episode, we're going to be talking about something a little different, something that I haven't really touched on. I've discussed numerous times the idea of the divine feminine, and it's something that I hold dear in my heart, which people who've been around for a while would know. But I wanted to kind of expand that and discuss about, we are going to talk about the divine feminine a bit, but I want to talk about dating and the dating world, which I know is something that people have a lot of opinions on. And I think sometimes when we discuss it, we very much focus on how to get a good partner and all that. But I think what's interesting to sort of look at is kind of the spiritual end of this and how this relates to our spirituality and how our relationships, our love and the way we interact with others relates to our spiritual journeys and our spiritual practices. So Morgan, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Morgan May. Thanks so much for having me on, Georgina. Such a treat. I am a transformation expert. I'm a coach. I work mainly with women. And we touch on, things pertaining to the divine feminine, to shadow work, the authentic self. I'm also on TikTok. That's how we know each other. We're colleagues. And yeah.
Yeah. So first, I think what would be interesting to kind of begin with, because we both brought it up, is this idea of the divine feminine. It's something that I know I've talked about quite a bit, and I think that it's really important. I've noticed that a lot of time when people look at spirituality, especially if they're coming at it from sort of a mainstream perspective, they don't realize that there is this very deeply feminine nature to it. And as women, if you are a woman, if you're a man listening to this won't apply to you, but it will apply to you if you mentioned the divine masculine, which is sort of the counterpart to it. Connecting to this nature can really help us become happier people, better people, and live more fulfilled lives. And it plays a huge, huge role in all of metaphysics, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's really interesting. Like, I started on my own healing journey, like trying to get in touch with my authentic self and like shedding all of these false like layers of the false self, like with different ideologies and big pharma and veganism, all this BS. And then the farther I got down, like that's when I really hit on the divine feminine. Like I think it's such an intrinsic part of like the human experience, and for men too. I mean, I think a lot, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, but like a lot of the issue we see with dating today, like men are wired to worship the feminine. Like really their whole bodies are just wired to proliferate the species, like to like sleep with us basically, right? Like that's the one carnal thing that they're like really programmed to do more so than us even. And so when we're disconnected from our authentic selves, from our divine feminine, it can wreak havoc in the dating world. So yeah, it's super pertinent right now, and I'm glad that there's a lot of conversation going on about it in the culture.
Yeah, I think we are truly disconnected from masculinity and femininity currently. I think there's a few sort of factors into it. One of them is the fact that I think we no longer I think there's this tendency in modern thought to like detach the human experience from like the natural and carnal side and sort of forget like our natural limitations that we have, because I really do view us as part of nature, not separate from it. As well, I think there's been a cultural shift that plays a bit of a point part in it. But also, I feel like we're very detached from the way we're meant to be living in a lot of ways. There are, of course, pros to how we're living now. I'm not trying to just bash that, but I think there is a serious disconnect. And it really does wreak havoc, because when we're not living an authentic life that aligns with who we're meant to be and what our will is meant to be, we're not able to express ourselves properly. And I think that leads to very unhealthy dynamics, and that expresses itself in our dating lives a lot of the time.
Totally. Yeah. I think you hit on some really good points. Like, um, our current modern culture is like just one massive trauma to the human body. Like, really, when you think of it, like, we're everything from how we're born into like hospitals, like that whole system is so messed up. And then we're like indoctrinated in schools, and like women are working 9 to 5 hours, consistent with a male fertility cycle, like male 24-hour fertility cycle. We're like, in front of technology has played such a massive role in disconnecting us from ourselves and from each other. And like now we're trying to like date and find love when there's like such a war on love and on nature. So so yeah, when I talk about dating, my approach is a little bit different. I believe that there's some strategy, but what I tell my clients is like it's 20-30% strategy, right? You have to get down to really like the truth of how we're wired, what we really need, what we're really attracted to. But the rest is the internal work, is like connecting with that source within yourself, that feminine within yourself, which by the way is not, I think you and I always appreciate content of yours when I see this, some shade on the love and light camp, right? It's like not all love and light when people think of like the divine feminine or feminine energy. We tend to think of like a more docile, like sundresses, which is that's a part of it, but there's so much more. And if you're not connected to that, in my opinion, you see a lot of negative results in your dating life.
Yeah, well, you end up living a sort of unbalanced life, right? The
Mhm.
whole like becoming, when you look at femininity and you look at, there's many faces of it, many aspects of it. I know that certain people who are really into archetypes have made like list of archetypes of femininity and list of archetypes of masculinity, which I think are really interesting and helpful to look at, so that we sort of, leave the paradigm that femininity is like only expressed in that one singular way that we associate it with.
Mhm.
Because if you're only expressing it in that way, you're missing part of yourself. Because there's a dark and a light nature in everyone, and I think to deny that is just. I think what happens is if you do, you become kind of unbalanced and unhealthy in a way, to the point where you're kind of like lying to yourself in some ways. And I just think it's kind of a trap for personal development, right? If you want to grow, if you want to understand things, you have to face the darker parts of your nature and who you are. Otherwise, like it'll mess you up. You need to be willing to integrate that, to look at that, and to understand that in order to be balanced and healthy, truly.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you hit on that in the previous statement that you made with our spirituality and just becoming more embodied. Like I think we're living a very masculine paradigm, especially with like Abrahamic religion. It's very up and out. It's very like seeking enlightenment, and just the good parts of our humanity are like emphasized, and everything else is demonic, right? Our anger is demonic, and our carnal nature, like you were saying before, is bad, and like we reject these key facets of our humanity. Well, like the feminine, that's a very masculine like paradigm, right? Like when we think of the six, the Star of David, like the six-pointed star, like the upward triangle, that's all masculine energy. It's like going up, like all this transcendental meditation. It's like up and out of the body. Like all of the spirituality that we've been exposed to is up and out of the body, when in reality, like we're humans, and you see this too, like especially on TikTok, everyone's talking about like 5D and I'm a light being from this planet and all this. It's like all dissociative. Like it's all rejecting the truth, like the truth of who you are and the fact that you're here now in this body. And when you look into like trauma work, everything is scored in the body, everything is kept in the body. The body knows. Like whenever I'm working with my clients, even in my own work, oh my god, once I got to like somatic healing, like that was a completely deeper, way more thorough like level of healing. And so like this shift that we're seeing, and that I'm bringing into dating too, is the descent into the body, which I think is so interesting because when the sperm enters the egg, right, the sperm becomes the head and the spine, and the masculine is associated with like the mental plane, like this enlightenment, this more meditation. But the body, the egg becomes our body. And so when we talk about feminine spirituality, like I talk a lot about feminine embodiment, being in the body, healing through the body, and accepting that you are here on this plane of like it's suffer. I mean, there's a lot of pain on this existence, right? But you must like stay here and with it and allow it to move through you, and accept all of it, right? I mean, even past the body, accept the body, but accept these darker parts of ourselves. I think it's so damaging. And I'm almost done. I know I'm like going off a little bit, but it's so damaging that Abrahamic religions, in my opinion, like demonize sexuality and anger and these like really key components to the human experience. Like it creates this separation within ourselves, and we're just abandoning and rejecting part of ourselves, and then we're wondering why we're attracting partners that are abandoning and rejecting part of us. It's like we're rejecting our bodies, we're like all dissociated, we're rejecting our anger and our sexuality, and it's I don't know, created a lot of havoc, I think, with interpersonal relationships and with the relationship we have with ourselves.
Oh yeah, we can't. The thing is, even if you try to ignore this part of your nature, and you see it a lot with people who are really in the Abrahamic paradigm, right? You try to repress this stuff so much, you end up basically, it boils up so much that it sort of explodes. And what I've noticed is the people, sometimes you see it, people will leave the Abrahamic paradigm and go so far the other direction that they've created a new form of imbalance. It's about recognizing this stuff as part of us, processing it, and then trying to, at least I think, seek some level of balance and harmony from the self, right? You need the negative and the positive to come together. And another term that I've heard used, at least in like the Western mysticism stuff, for masculine and feminine, though I think the terms masculine and feminine are useful, but this I think describes one aspect of it, is active and receiving, which basically argues that the masculine is the active, it's the force in the universe, right? Whereas the feminine is the receiving and the form. And I think, as you were touching on earlier, we as a culture focus so much on that force and that expansion, that endless expansion, endless growth, that we forget about form, which is where, the femininity is the, shape, taking all that growth and shaping it into something and molding it into something. And those two aspects, I mean, they need each other, right? You can't have endless restriction or endless growth. They need to come together to create some sort of like balanced, I keep saying balance, but I think it does fit here, reality.
Modern feminism was, like, in my opinion, the Western war on feminine energy. Like, it took women out of it basically devalued the domestic sphere and everything that you know the feminine brings to life, right? Nurturing and um beauty. It's just it created a war on it. And now what we see, like, how many generations later, is a world where everyone's working, everyone's burned out. Like, there is no, even a war on beauty. When we look at our cities and like how the turns that design has taken, it's all very simple. There's no like details. Like when you look at like ancient, not ancient, but like old Baroque design and Rococo, it's just like it used to be much more ornate and beautiful, and there was like an artistic quality to it. And now our world is just really void of all of that. And in my opinion, when you look at it all as one big picture, it's like a giant war on the feminine, and we're all living in our masculine. And men, there's been a war on the masculine as well. We're talking mainly about the feminine now, but there certainly has been a war on the masculine, and we've just forgotten. So I think what's this wave that you and I are seeing, it's a kind of a wave of remembering, and remembering these truths, these like universal truth. I mean, it's like a hermetic principle. Everything has a gender. It's like masculine or feminine is in everything, and it's like what creates the whole universe. So it's good to see that the tide is shifting.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of the masculine and the feminine, I mean, it dates back so far. I mean, if you look at really any religious tradition, any cultural tradition ever, I mean, it comes up in some form somewhere. And a lot of the aspects are similar cross culturally, even in cultures that never interacted. As well, yeah, I think there is, on the beauty concept. For me, I feel like beauty, and this is an opinion that I don't think is held too often these days, is a virtue, right? There's something divine in beauty. Like when you look at a really beautiful expression of art, I feel like there's something to it. And I feel like what's happened is we no longer, when we make things, we're focused on utility and function. And of course, things need to have utility and function, but we've forgotten that beauty is real and is a thing and has value in and of itself, right? I think, and it's actually, I think this does relate to the demonization of the feminine, because I've noticed people will think that like pretty things and aesthetic things, and I know I actually used to think this before I realized that this is a stupid thought, is it's silly, it's flighty, it's for people who are not serious. And the more I thought about that, the less that makes sense, right? Beauty is a good, it's wholly good. And I think that we forget that. I think that what we do often is see things as that are considered like feminine as trivial, which is ridiculous, because without these feminine traits like nurturing, I mean, our society would be terrible, right? We need to nurture people, we need to create, we need to do these feminine things. And I think the demonization of them is a net negative for our culture.
Oh, totally. Who was it that said? I think it was Dostoevsky that said beauty will save the world. Like, I just think it's in my opinion, it's like evidence of God. It's evidence of the divine. Like, what's the point if you're just on a planet and everything is just functioning? Like, you're just like a little Sims drone, like going from A to B. It's like there's no point. But the feminine energy that we bring to life, like it's our like the feminine is a purveyor of beauty and of pleasure, right? We make life worth living. We're like the inspiration to keep going. Otherwise, like, it's just suffering and work and struggle and order. It's too much. Granted, the opposite, you can't have too much of the opposite, right? Again, it's this balance word that you keep bringing up. But there certainly is value to the feminine. It's just not quantifiable in the same way that you can quantify production value. It's like it's different, but it's, in my opinion, it's spiritual. It's like a nutrient. Like whenever I'm traveling, I lived in Paris for a little bit, and I always said, like, you could never be unhappy in that city. You walk out your front door and you're surrounded by beauty. Like, all there's just like architecture. There's art throughout the whole city. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. And then I went back, to where I was in the States, and my college, for example, was designed by the same man that designed several mental institutions. It was just very industrial and totally like no beauty. And when winter hit, it was like, oh my God, like, why, why, what am I doing here? So yeah, I consider it like a nutrient that the world needs. And because we've been so deprived of it, like, look where it's gotten us. Like, everyone, look what happened during COVID. Like, everyone's burned out, and now no one wants to leave their homes. They've gotten a taste, right, of that, like, rest and relaxation and family. And it's like they're remembering what we've been missing this whole time.
Yeah, people, I think during that period were able to get hobbies and were able to spend time with their families in a way that they didn't. I think culturally, what we've started valuing really highly is um, endless productivity. Productivity is good. It's bad to be lazy. Being lazy is a problem to not do that. But I think we do forget those inner things. And because of that, we're not thinking about those inner things. We're not thinking about our family. We're not thinking about our personal lives. When we go out to date, right? We're lost on how to really interact with people or know exactly what we want, right? I think a lot of people who are dating, they're so detached from that nourishing inner hearth life. Like, I know in the ancient world, they really prioritized the hearth and put a lot of emphasis on it. And so because of that, they don't know what they want. And I think that that's part of why we're ending up with a lot of people who are quite unhappy, and people who are quite unhappy who are not like unattractive people, like attractive people who would be good partners, who are just they're disconnected so much that they don't know how to, function properly in a relationship.
Yeah. Or they think that they know what they want. When you study attraction, the laws of attraction, I started researching how to date, and I was like, oh my God, this is the complete opposite. Literally the complete opposite of everything that I've learned, right? I was like in New York City, it's such a hustle culture, a very masculine city. And what I was learning about attraction, what I really needed, and I tested it, and I, you know, uh, tried to figure out what my body wanted, and how my body felt with different partners and different kinds of treatment, and like it's just the complete fucking opposite. And so I think a lot of us are walking around like clueless about human nature, and really who men are and what men need. Like, a lot of women are looking for like another woman in the form of a man. It's like, with no respect or reverence for the masculine and really what that is, or how they communicate, or what they need, and how it's not objectifying if he thinks that you're beautiful. For example, like, there's so many, or like, oh, holds the door open for you. Like, I've heard crazy crazy stories from men about women that have like snapped at them for very chivalrous, like, respectful acts. And yeah, I just think it destroys intimacy, and when we don't know these things. So yeah, I spent a lot of time like researching that, and I talk a lot about that on my channel. And the women that I've worked with, my most successful client to date is like literally crypto co-founder, and was super in her masculine, very very successful in her career. She was dating dudes that were not nearly on her level, and yeah, in like 3 or something months, just slowly, turning the ship around, and teaching her about attraction, and really like how to move in the dating sphere. Like she got married in like I think 8 months after working together, she met her soulmate, like literally a month and a half after we worked together. But this stuff is like once you sink into it, once you study feminine energy and you like understand like the logic of the game, the true logic, not like the modern bullshit, programming logic.
Yeah, I think no matter how much ideology you swallow, we all kind of want the same thing, right? I think most women generally want similar stuff, and I think that they just don't fully understand it. And once you break it down and you focus on it, I think it's pretty clear what people want. I mean,
These ideas that assume that us as humans have any control over nature. It's so egoic to me. It's like it's it's a lie ultimately, and it's very misguided, and it's always to our detriment. Like we don't have any control over nature. Nature will always, always, always win. And so the more that we can surrender to those natural laws, in my opinion, what I found is like the happier you're going to be, actually, the more you're going to benefit, and like the less struggle you're going to encounter in your life.
yeah, I think that typically if we really focus on living in harmony with what the natural way of the world is, typically the better our lives go. Like if you try to, recognize the cycles of your body, recognize the cycles of the year, take care of yourself in the way that, your ancestors did, and, understand that stuff and live sort of the lifestyle that you're, naturally drawn towards, I think you tend to feel the best and you tend to make the best choices in your life. And when you're making the choice, you're going to attract the best possible partner, right? Because obviously when you're dating, the goal is, or I would hope the goal is, to find someone to spend your life with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, you need to take care of yourself and be living in a good way so you can find someone who, is on your level, and then you can get together and make each other better.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes into like what we were kind of hitting on earlier. Like if you said it when we started, like we're part of nature. And if you're rejecting nature, you're rejecting a part of yourself. And then what does that mean? Partners are like mirrors, right? Like it's like the sickest joke of all. If you're struggling in your dating life, there is a pattern there. There's a pattern with the types of men or women that you're dating, and once you see that, that's a mirror into your own psyche and your own shit, right? And so like if you're attracting partners that are rejecting you on some level, or they're not fully available, to you, or available emotionally, like it means you're rejecting parts of yourself ultimately. And I see it all too often that it's this concept of like rejecting your feminine essence, rejecting the flow of nature. You know, the more we can accept these truths, these like unfailing truths, like these truths that permeate, it's like laws of the entire universe, laws of nature, the more um, success and love, ultimately, like love we can bring into our lives because we're creating that space.
Oh, absolutely. The people in our lives are a reflection of us. I remember I read something ages ago where it was like, I don't know what the exact number was. It was like the something amount of people near you make up who you are. And I'm like, I think there's probably some truth to that. Maybe not that extreme, but to some level. On the whole, I think engaging with what I would call like the sex wars, whatever you want to call them, and men and women both do it, right? Where you bash the other sex. It can be cathartic. It really can. I think we've all probably, indulged in it at some point in time where we've, got on some kind of vaguely anti the other sex rant. But on the whole, it is not productive and typically harmful, because what you were mentioning earlier, it's much more important when you want a good partner and when you're frustrated with people you've dated, because I'm sure everyone listening to this, and I'm sure we have made both, everyone's made bad choices with who we've dated. And if you haven't, I'm incredibly envious of you and I want your life. But because of that, the way to surmount that and get past making those mistakes, I think, is to explore the shadow and explore that darker part of our nature. There's a term called shadow work. It gets thrown around a lot. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are familiar with it. That basically it's a process. It was originally a Jungian thing, and now it's kind of taken on a life of its own, where you look into the shadow, which the shadow is sort of the darker self. The term's pretty self-explanatory, but and then you work through that and you try to understand what's in your shadow, and then through that you sort of integrate it into yourself and have it connected to you in a way that's healthy and balanced, so that you understand it, you control it. You're not trying to get rid of it, because you can't rip things off yourself, right? That shadow nature is there. There's no abolishing it, there's no removing it. Like, that's sort of a fantasy. But what you can do is you can integrate it, you can understand it, you can learn about it, and then knowing that you can actually use it as a tool to make better choices and to live a more fulfilling life. And it is kind of difficult at first and a little painful, but it's a process that I think pretty much everyone should go through. I guess if you got some really severe trauma, maybe talk to someone about it before doing it on your own. But I think it's incredibly helpful.
I spent like so many years doing shadow work and like trying to unearth these parts of myself that I really needed to like know. And then once I found the divine feminine and the dark goddess and like the warrior goddesses, um, it just brought so much more life into that like arena. Like I think, we were saying before, there's like many faces of the feminine. There's this like soft, lighter side, sundresses and giggling, but there's this fierce side. There's this dark goddess that has been demonized in the culture. And when you embark on that journey to really go inward and like become intimate with these parts. I mean, what's not talked about, first of all, a lot of people are very scared of this like language, probably not your audience, but whenever I talk about it on TikTok, I piss off some Christians or have people like unfollow me thinking that it's just evil or whatnot. But like the truth is that your power, all of your potential is like actually lying in your shadow. And Georgina, you're totally right. You can't ever divorce yourself of it. It's always going to be connected to you. But that's what we try to do with these Abrahamic religions. We try to reject and abandon and just forego our anger for like love and light. And what happens? You can't ever ditch it. So it manifests in your life. It manifests in the form of partnerships, of friends, of like bosses, of situations, of really bad situations that you can get yourself into. Like an unintegrated shadow will bring up so much more trauma for you, it will attract things really abruptly, force you to integrate, that force you to look at that if you're not doing that work. But oftentimes people are very fearful of it because it is so painful, like and it is so deep. Especially, I mean, I've dealt with a lot of big T trauma in my life, and like my whole life was avoidance. I was avoiding feeling pain, and I had no relationship to anger. And where did it like land me? It landed me in not in any position of power and anxious and suffering from mental health symptoms, quote unquote. But like, that journey of like going inward and like you have to be fearless about it. I say to my clients, I'm like, if you are experiencing um, if the degree of suffering that you're experiencing now is greater than the degree of suffering it's going to take to go into those shadows and to heal, then you're in an amazing spot, because that is what's going to fuel you forward. Because it's painful, and a lot of people don't do it, and a lot of people or stop midway or cop out with like more numbing agents. But yeah, that in my opinion is like it's a hard path, but it's the path that's going to yield you the most power and the most peace. Really, what it's not just like worldly power and egoic power. It's like personal, unshakable. No one can say shit to you. You know exactly who you are. You're standing in your truth and your authenticity, and like you've been to hell and back. Kind of power. So yeah, I it's life changing work, and it's relatively easy to start. I just started like journaling. Making like a ritual out of my journaling practice. Some feminine embodiment work, can help bring you there. Some work with like the dark feminine. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, not running from that, I think is important.
Think numbing is sort of the vice of our current world, right? I recently reread Brave New World, which I know everyone reads when they're like a teenager, but I read it again because I was having a conversation. I feel it feels apt, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have all these comforts, and so I like living a comfortable life. I don't want to go back to living in a hut, but we are very detached and we avoid things. We're escapist. And I even see this in the spiritual esoteric space, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've met quite a few people who have gotten into spirituality really because they want an escape, right? They're not interested in these higher concepts and this higher meaning, these beings, right? To connect with them, to honor them, or for like mystic reasons. They want to just escape the material world. They want to avoid life, really, and avoid material existence.
Mhm.
And the thing about that is if you go that route, you're going to lose your grounding, and it's not going to be helpful, right? It's doing spirituality for a reason that will end up backfiring. I mean, I guess it gets the people into spirituality, so I guess that's a bit of a perk, but at the same time, I mean, it's not going to lead to anywhere helpful. And on
Yeah.
your point about anger, I mean, anger, there's a place for it. I know that we hate feeling it, but at times it's kind of necessary. Like, let's use like an example in nature, right? We've all seen or heard about, like, the mama bear, right? You come near the bear cub, the mama bear is going to start freaking out and coming after you. That is that bear feeling a very negative emotion, like objectively,
Mhm.
but it protects their children, right? It keeps their families safe, it keeps the world safe, right?
Mhm.
Our negative emotions, while they suck, they're typically telling us something. I mean, if you have like, certain in certain cases they can be sort of false and something you need to work through, but a lot of the times it's our mind and body communicating with us for a reason, and sure, it can not always, like, it can get unhealthy, but to an extent I think our negative emotions have a purpose
Yeah, I
and are
mean,
not meaningless.
yeah. No, that's a beautiful example you just gave. Like I call it righteous anger. Like if you don't have that, if like typically anger is associated with the masculine, like it's more socially acceptable for men to feel anger. And I give the example of like a burglar invading someone's home and a guy just killing him completely to protect his family. Like obviously anger is needed. If we didn't have anger, we'd be like placated, like docile doormats. And so I think it's especially important for women to get in touch with this quality because like this nice girl programming has plagued the entire fucking country. We have girls walking around like scared to say no for dates and stuff, like texting. I'm like, oh my God, like it's really dangerous. It's actually dangerous. Like there's, a lot of really negative things that come of it. And yes, unintegrated are like, I call it emotional mastery, right? Like, no, I'm not advocating for anyone to be like running down the streets and like chopping everyone's heads off and cursing everyone out. But when you embark on this journey on your own of forming a relationship to this very powerful potent emotion and giving yourself permission to feel it and giving yourself permission to like experience it as a face of the divine feminine of God. Like God gave you your anger's only concern is you and protecting you. That's it. It doesn't give a shit about anyone else. Like that is sacred. That's holy. And so like when we reject this part of ourselves, like God, we're not put here to be doormats and taken advantage of and all of this. Like we're put here to be creator beings and like in our power, right? So yeah, I'm really passionate about that. It's why I go so hard for the dark goddess on my channel because it's so needed right now, especially for women. And and I think it gets a really bad rap. And when you do integrate that anger, and then when you're experiencing conflict in the world, like with a boyfriend or with a friend, like you're able to have like way healthier reactions to it and discussions that don't end up breaching any of your boundaries and lead to resentment, that don't end up ending the relationship.
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah,
important to be able to stand up to yourself, to have boundaries. Because without boundaries, I mean, any relationship is going to fail. You
yeah,
could be like that person could be like your perfect soulmate, right? Given to you by the divine. And if you can't, communicate your boundaries, it's going to fall apart.
yeah,
And part of communicating your boundaries is knowing when to say no. And interestingly, our culture is very weird right now for young girls in particular because women are being told to be masculine, but at the same time, they're sort of told to never say no to things. It creates this like really weird,
yeah.
completely disjointed. It's like the worst of both worlds, essentially.
You're so right about that. Yeah, my client that I met with earlier today, she's like a badass corporate girly, like climbing the ladder, really successful in her career, and more masculine. Has a really hard time surrendering and being in flow. Always has to be doing things, but also is like a huge nice girl and can't say no to things and has weak boundaries. And it's like it's this distortion of the right now everyone like an analogy I give is like like when you Xerox copy like a book make a photocopy of it, and then you make a photocopy of the photocopy, and then you make a photocopy of the photo, and then by the time it's like the fifth copy, it's just, you can kind of make out the words, like you kind of know what it says, but it's not that clear. Like that is where I think we're at with like masculine and feminine energy. It's just, there's been all these distortions, and like guilt and shame and fear ultimately controlling all of the distortion. And so yeah, like coming back to yourself and remembering who you are and connecting to like your divinity and your power, your shadows, like no longer running from these things, from your pain. It's really at the end of it, all humans, we you hear things like, especially on TikTok, fear of success, fear of failure, fear. Ultimately, I think we're all actually afraid of our own power. Like that's really at the root, the core of it. And like anger and eros and like sexuality and your truth, being in your truth, those are all facets of our power, and those all lie in the shadow realm. That's like the dominion of the dark goddess. So yeah, I'm passionate about encouraging women to connect to these parts of us so that they can blow through that BS programming, frankly, and yeah, just have an easier time on the planet in general.
Yeah, I think on the whole, surrender is a thing that a lot of people struggle with,
Yeah.
right? We are very rigid, we're very controlling, or at least this was something that I know I had to work through. When I got into mysticism and spirituality, for me, one of the hardest things to do was to surrender, right? When you meditate, when you do mystic stuff, you have to surrender to the experience
Mm-hmm.
and not try to control everything because you're fundamentally interacting with something higher than you, something greater than you. And we're taught, to be very on top of our shit. Very, at least I am. I'm very type A naturally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, like one of the first big challenges, and it was one that really I struggled with for so long, is just learning to surrender and to let go. And when I learned to do that, I mean, it benefited a lot of things in my life, right? I was able to have healthy relationships, but that first mountain is very hard for a lot of people, and I think it's something that people aren't always consciously identifying as being unable to surrender.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like, oh wow, I can't get into this stuff, I can't focus. But in reality, it's really coming down to that you need to be able to release and trust, which it can be very hard for people.
In that process, you really get very intensely familiar with your shit and with your ego and with your shadows. Sometimes, I think what you were saying before, a lot of people that I sat with, I think it was kind of an escape. You can definitely, there's a light side and a dark side to any tool that you use, right? There's even a dark side with shadow work that I fell into. I'm like, I got too much into the shadows and stayed too much in this realm. And you need balance, you need pleasure and fun and beauty, like we were saying before. So there's a light and a dark to all of it. But like in those experiences, I like the main thing that you must do in order for the medicine to like really work and show you what you need to see is to surrender. But that the ego hates that. Ego likes to be in control. It likes to feel safe ultimately. And when you put yourself in experiences like meditation or just surrendering to the flow of life, like it's terrifying. And so it does take a lot of concerted effort, right? And the dark goddess, Kali, when you study Kali, she's the ultimate ego death. Like you must surrender and you must integrate. Her story is like she didn't slay her demons. She like consumed them. She consumed the blood of all these demons that were like running rampant across the world, or yeah, across the land, and integrated those shadows, and surrendered to the fact that she couldn't slay them.
Absolutely. I think it's important to explore the stuff. And that's the thing. Like, you can't only explore the shadow because what happens is if you're, especially if you're talking about, like, the ego, right? You can't fully, if you're going to destroy some part of yourself or purge spiritually in any way, you have to build something after that, right?
Mhm.
I like the way of explaining life as this cycle, right? Life, death, rebirth, right?
Mhm.
After there's that death period that is important in anyone's journey, the person has to be reborn, right? New stuff needs to come in. So when you take things apart, you add new in. And so it's not just, fully purging. I think that's when it gets kind of toxic. Because I have seen cases where that's happened, right? I've seen people who get really, really into the shadow work stuff and they're so fixated on spiritually purging that
Mhm.
they're almost using shadow work as like a crutch to not add on in specific ways. So
Yeah.
it's definitely about, I guess, moderation to some extent. I think most people generally are the type who need more shadow work, not less, but there are cases where it can go too far. like most things in life.
Oh yeah. I now have like a process for shadow work that I'll just share. Like, um, you know, as long as you are aware that like everyone's gonna have a different tolerance level. Like I've gone like a few weeks like really just being so fucking angry and like going into the woods and screaming just like I've been in like anger processes where like I'm riding that wave, but like that could consume you. It could consume you really easily. Those emotions are actually a little addictive, right? Depression and anger, like it's just you kind of get wrapped up in it. So if anyone's embarking on this journey, like balancing it out with pleasure practices, like I started heating up coconut oil and just lathering that on my body and going to like ecstatic dance sessions and just like doing things purely for pleasure, like buying roses for my house and taking some breaks. But you need to be checking in with yourself. And like, even sometimes I would just like, at least once a week, I made myself do some pleasure practice or doing my makeup, just something that was lighter. But that will help a lot. And like just giving yourself that space to like process.
Yeah, I think whenever you're doing any sort of big spiritual thing that is really heavy and intense and breaking a bunch of new boundaries, helping you, learn about stuff about yourself you didn't know. After that point, it's really important to ground and balance your life out. Because I've seen cases where people get really into spirituality and they sort of lose track of the rest of their life around them. And at that point, that's not too healthy either. It's important when doing anything esoteric, to really make sure that you are grounded in reality, to take time to, do things you like that are pleasurable, to do lighthearted stuff like, dance or something kind of simple, to just keep yourself level and in a good place. Because if you're not in a good place, you're not going to be able to keep this future big ritual, the future big experience you have. They're not going to do the same thing for you, right? They're going to not have, the same level of benefit that they could have if you were in a sort of controlled, quote unquote, good space when you did them. Yeah, you're not going to figure anything out, or you're not going to figure everything out immediately. There's a reason why one of the sort of biggest little bits of repeated lore about spirituality is the idea of someone who basically is given directly from the divine the secrets to the entire universe, and their brain just breaks and they go crazy. They can't handle it. And I think that obviously that's a very extreme story, but I think we can apply that to our personal lives, right? We're sometimes not ready to know things. Spiritual journeys are called journeys for a reason, right? They're not like a one and done thing. Discovering all this stuff, discovering your true will, accomplishing the great work, living a embodied life, right? That stuff takes time, and it's gonna change. It's gonna throw you curveballs. It's not always completely linear, but that's sort of why it's a journey, right? That's sort of the point.
Yeah, no, totally. And you can pause the journey too. Like there's been times where I'm just like I hung out with people that were like kind of in the matrix and it was kind of nice. I was like, okay, like little reprieve from all this like intense stuff. So yeah, and also too, like at the end of the day, a big thing that I've learned kind of recently, like, I've had so much pressure on myself to like fulfill my purpose and my mission and heal these generational things. And oh my God, if I don't heal, then like it's just at the end of the day, the biggest secret is that nothing actually fucking matters. Like literally nothing actually matters. So like do it to have a more functional life, to have a better life, but like don't get lost in the sauce too much and like put so much pressure. It's just nothing really matters, and the goal is to just like I've always I'm kind of a more practical healer, so like I engaged in my healing work for like practical outcomes, and so I think if you stick to those, it could help to ground in reality versus kind of going off the deep end.
Yeah, I think it's good to have sort of like mini goals and targets and stuff so that you can sort of keep yourself on some sort of track, and have things work out for you. Because I think the goal for most people is to, be happier, have a better life, and have a better, I guess, romantic life. As those all connect. That's the thing about all this stuff, right? Like finding a good relationship, finding your spiritual goal. All this stuff is actually really linked. The physical health, the spiritual health, and the mental health, I feel like they are super interwoven to the point where they're pretty much inseparable. You can't heal one without healing the others, whether you're
Mm.
conscious of it or not.
Yeah, that's like a big thing we miss today in modernity. I like that you brought that up. It's like, especially in mainstream medicine, it's like, oh, I have a symptom, I'm sad. Like, okay, here's a bunch of pills that are gonna screw up not just that you're sad, but your whole body, because like the human body is a holistic entity. And so you target one thing, you put an SSRI in your system, and it's actually gonna have implications on like the entire system, not just how happy or sad you are, right? So yeah, approach like honestly, all the work that I did on myself in dating helped me immensely with the relationship that I had with myself, and I didn't even know, until I was like midway through that journey. So yeah, they all feed into each other, definitely.
Yeah, well, because all the things people do within the dating world to kind of improve themselves, or I guess level up. I've heard that term. Like
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it, right? I feel like there's a bunch of different terms that people use, and the general concept of basically trying to become a better person to attract new partners, right? Which is a thing, if you want to get an ideal partner, you should probably be doing on some level. But inherently, whenever you do something like that, it's going to improve your life even without a partner, right? And I think that while you're trying to like improve yourself to find better partners, because that's what I think people should do, I think there's this like, well, one thing that bothers me generally about a lot of culture is entitlement, right? You're not entitled to like the perfect partner. If you want to get the perfect partner, you should work on yourself, and then you will typically attract someone that you genuinely are into. But all those things are going to help you even outside of dating, right? Because it's still self improvement. Even if you're going like, well, I want to improve this so that I can have a happier dating life and find my partner, my perfect person, right? That those are all. It's still going to help you even outside of it. So it's still worth it, even if it doesn't immediately pay off, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I think a quote that I love. I'm actually going to butcher the exact quote, so I can't give the exact quote. But Marilyn Monroe was quoted in an article about why she dresses the way that she does. A lot of women hating on her, frankly, and she was like, "Why wouldn't I dress for men? Why wouldn't I dress in a way that a man likes? Like I'm a woman. Therefore, I like the things that men like and I like are complementary. Like I like looking and feeling like a woman. I like clothing that enhances my figure and like men like that too and I like that men like that. And why is that bad? Like I like men. So naturally, that makes sense that I would wear clothes that they like and then I would like that response. So anyways, all to say it's like and you were hitting on it before with like the man bashing and when you're doing things, we're part of nature. Men and women are designed to be together. So when you're doing things to improve yourself as a woman and improve yourself in the eyes of men or like not I say this, I'm not talking about like foregoing your authenticity and your emotions, like not at all, but like learning that game and learning, about your feminine energy. Men like love feminine energy, like flies to honey, right? So when you're on that journey, it's like naturally it's going to be good for you and good for men because you guys are supposed to like be harmonious to one another.
Yeah, I think the whole men and women turning against each other thing, it's just, it doesn't really benefit either of us. I think that, both sexes have things that would materially benefit their lives that, we should work on, right? I think that there's some truth to that. But I think that at the same time, if you turn against the other sex, I mean, it just creates division and it hurts our society on a very deep level because if men and women are not, working together to build create a healthier world, I mean, that's going to mess up the future of the next generations. I think it's important for us to communicate because often what benefits men and what benefits women in terms of personal happiness are aligned if you actually sit down and talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think that the constant like infighting between the sexes is counterproductive. I get why people engage with it at points. It's coming from a place of frustration, but it's a frustration that's completely counterproductive. It's not useful. And I think that, we should just be okay with, trying to enjoy the other sex and enjoy our relationship together because I think that's a happier way to live anyways.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I get it too. I get the bashing. I think that like the macro picture of the sexes and where everyone stands is just a complete fucking mess, honestly. Like we have very weak men, we have very masculine, like unhappy, miserable women. Like it's just on both sides of the fence. There's there's a lot of damage that these ideologies have done and modern day has done, in my opinion. But to categorize all men as this and all women as this, it ends up hurting yourself. Like, if you're designed to be with a man and to be complementary to a man and you're bashing men, like, that's again a part of you. Like, nothing is really separate. Um, and it's just like, I feel like it's getting out of style too, like slowly. This man bashing. I hope, because I just think it's not, like you're saying, it's not productive. It's not doing anything good. And it's not to say that all men are amazing or all women are amazing, but like honestly, like some of the most transformational work that I've done, I had a lot of anger towards men and towards my dad, right? And so healing these wounds and really understanding the spirit and the heart of the masculine and really what men need, and beginning to see men, even weak men or even, whatever, through that lens, like, was so transformational, like healing for those relationships and healing for myself. So I think honestly, like, we talked about the war on the feminine. Yes, there's like ultimately a war on love. Like, we see like the red pill movement and like characters like Andrew Tate, which I actually don't disagree with a lot of what he says, but I do think when it comes to like love, there's some issues there. And the feminism, or even like this bimbo trend, and uh it's just it's a lot of women and men really having very closed hearts and being like really into strategy land and really like speaking from a wounded place. And yeah, it doesn't do anything good for you at the end of the day. Really, healing those wounds
Yeah.
will, though.
Yeah, well, I think like the men who kind of, go a little hard on women and the women who go a little hard on men, I think sometimes this is the thing. I think they get that resentment and frustration from wounds and past experiences they've had. Like, I don't think the grievances come from nowhere, but I think the way to fix that wound and those bad experiences is not to enter a dark place where you start hating the other sex. I think the answer is to, heal yourself and try to heal the world around you. And I
Mhm.
don't think that the thing is the infighting, the sex war, when people engage with it, even if it's often from a place that I think there's a grain of truth to, it makes it worse. It makes all these problems just like fester and get infected, and
Mhm.
it just makes everything worse, in my opinion. I think that it's counterproductive. I think that it's not always useful.
Yeah, no, I think it's not cute. Like, spewing negativity, it's not that we shouldn't be authentic and like, but yeah, it's not very love and light. No, I'm just kidding. But
Not very love and light, not very namaste, not
oh my God, namaste, that's hysterical.
I gotta make fun of that term. It's so funny to me. Um, but yeah, we're at the hour. I mean, I think it's a good place to end. Where can people find you? Where's your corner of the internet? Where do you lurk?
I lurk on TikTok. You can find me at the Morgan May there, and on Instagram, or head to my website, themorganmay.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I have been Georgina Rose. I am the host of this podcast. You can find me on a lot of platforms. I am on, let me pull up the list. I made a list because I'm insane. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, YouTube. That's like what I mostly do. I'm mostly on YouTube. Patreon and Ko-Fi. If you support this show, you get your name read off if you volunteer to, and not everyone wants to. That's totally fine. So, special thank you to Shiraz, Neva, Emily, Lilith, Jonah, Nauseated, and Lee for your continued support. We really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. Helps keep me going and enables me. So, thank you for listening to the podcast. This has been the Postmodern Iconoclast, and I will see you in 2 weeks. All right. Bye.